People pleasing is fundamentally a protective strategy, right? It's a survival tactic. Even if it's not something that we would have chosen consciously, our young selves were like, oh, okay, this is what I got to do. Like, this is how I fall in line. This is how I get loved. This is how people give me the smiles and the warmth and the pats on the back. And so we grow up with this getting further and further ingrained into our sense of ourselves and how we move in the world. And so it's no wonder that when it comes to our adult experiences of dating and relating, people pleasing is going to be just as prevalent there, if not more so, when I want this person to love me, especially if you're coming from a place of any degree of lack.
We are talking today about people pleasing and how it's ruining your relationships and probably all of your dates as well. It ruins the chance of connecting authentically. And if you are a people pleaser or if you have dated a people pleaser, this episode is for you. Hi, everybody. I am Sandy Weiner. Welcome back to Last First Date Radio, where we believe it is never too late to go on your last first date. And to support you on your journey to lasting love, I have written 3 books. The first one is Becoming a Woman of Value, How to Thrive in Life and Love. I wrote this book because it was the book I needed when I started on my dating after divorce journey to rebuild my self-worth and my self-confidence. And I wrote it to help anybody who needs some support in that area. The second book is Choice Points in Dating. And this book is really for anybody who wants a step-by-step guide to dating, especially in midlife and beyond. And my last book is called Love at Last. And these are true stories of couples who found love later in life. Some of them are clients, some are podcast guests, some are people I never met before, but they all shared their beautiful stories of how to find love later in life and all the lessons that they learned along the way. All books are available on Amazon for paperback, Kindle, or audiobook. And I also have tons of stuff on my website, lastfirstdate.com. You can find my coaching programs, my one-on-one coaching, my group coaching, and all of my courses at lastfirstdate.com. I also have a Facebook group that is for women over 40 who are looking to find lasting love and get positive support. Most of the groups out there are just a place to complain with nobody really guiding you. And I set out to make a group that would be free and for any woman over 40 who actually wants to be guided and wants to do better and wants a place to come where there's a ton of empathy and support. So join us at your last first date. And now for my guest, Darshana Avila. She's a trauma-informed somatic educator, practitioner, and international speaker who helps women reconnect with the most essential aspects of themselves, their truth, their desires, and their capacity for profound pleasure and power. Her work has been featured in Netflix's Sex, Love, and Goop, fantastic show if you haven't watched it, The Guardian, The New Yorker, and many leading podcasts. So Darshana, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sandy. Glad to be here.
Darshana, what makes your body of work, Erotic Wholeness, different from a lot of other people's ideas about sex and intimacy and relationship coaching?
So easiest way to answer that is to define it. So for me, eroticism, we can define that more as life force energy as opposed to something that is specific to sexuality. So if we think about our creativity, our dynamism, the things we're passionate about, activism, how we tend our relationships, our life force flows into all of that. And it flows into our sex and our sensuality and our intimate relating as well. And culturally, we have a really strange bias around sex. Like you should want it and you should exude it to a certain extent, but then there's all this shame and this stigma. And what that's done is really suppress for many of us just our fundamental vitality and our aliveness. So I started out calling myself a sex and intimacy coach, and I certainly work in that arena. And yet my clients were continually showing me, and I was experiencing it through my own journey as well, that there was a broader conversation to be had about how we really get to channel our creative life force energy in all regards. And that's where the evolution from just speaking about sex to talking about eroticism happened for me. And it's not a unique thought, that I am not the originator of that thought. I give credit primarily to Audre Lorde, who is one of the grandmothers of the Black intersectional feminist movement. Her essay, Uses of the Erotic, which has influenced so many people, myself included, really expounds upon that in a beautiful way. So I always recommend people go and check that essay out. You could just Google uses of the erotic and you'll find her reading it on YouTube, or you'll find PDFs of it. It's not very long. And it really does help us to understand ourselves in a more holistic way, not just through the lens of sexuality, but that our sex is integral and interrelated with other aspects. And then the wholeness piece is to really consider that intrinsically we have all that we need within us, that there's nothing that is fundamentally wrong or broken, even when we're struggling, even when we feel fragmented, and that our healing journeys and our choices to pursue transformation and growth and what have you, what we're fundamentally doing then is integrating those fragments and really learning, where in myself do I want to lead from? What parts of myself might need some soothing or need to be released because they don't serve me anymore, as opposed to making pieces of ourselves wrong, which most of us do that. We get a lot of implicit and explicit conditioning and influences that would lead many of us to, and I'm not exceptionalizing myself from this at all when I say, like, we tend to be very negative toward parts of ourselves, to punish them, to shame them, to assume that they're somehow a personal failing. And I have yet to meet anybody who has gotten to be more satisfied with the way that they're living their life, thrive in their relationships, attain more levels of insert here, whatever the measure of success might be, by berating themselves. It really comes from integration and love. So that is what my body of work is about: eroticism and wholeness. And how do we become more of ourselves? We could say, how do we be more human, really, by embracing our erotic nature and doing the work of really embodying our wholeness.
I love that definition, and I couldn't agree more around so much of what you shared. I think that no matter where we come from, I think especially here in the United States in particular, we have a lot of very puritanical views of sex that are still integrated into our lives. And it's interesting in other cultures, like in Europe and South America, that sex is viewed a little bit differently. There's a lot more openness around sexuality. People seem to be more comfortable with their sexuality. I'm curious what you have to say about that. I know it's a little off topic, but
No,
I'm wondering. Yeah.
I mean, I can certainly say with like clarity that different cultures have different relationships to sexuality. That is a statement of fact. Now, some are more permissive and embrace, and some have very similar or even greater, like, conservatism, and use the word, like, the puritanical values. I lived in South America for many years, but South America is massive and there are different cultures. And so I happen to live in Chile, and I was married to a Chilean, and I would not say that Chilean culture, for instance, is more permissive or inclusive around sexuality than America, or, United States of America. I would say it's pretty similar or even a little more stringent there. But yes, many European nations, again, not making them homogenous, different cultures in Europe do have different relationships. Also, I think the biggest, probably if we were to try to, like, create some generalized categories, many intact indigenous cultures and cultures that are more earth-based and or that still have, like, a matrilineal influence, have very different attitudes about bodies And there's a conflation for many of us between body and sex, right? Like, so just the showing of bodies, the seeing of bodies, what's considered shameful or taboo or dirty, and what's considered absolutely normal. I mean, we in modern day America still have people who think a breastfeeding mother, if that's in the public view, that's a dirty thing and shouldn't be seen. Whereas you have other indigenous cultures that bare-chested women is completely natural and normal. So it's hard to speak in generalities about that, but it's absolutely true that for you, me, living in the culture that we do, our dominant conditioning is a very sex and body negative one. And that is explicit and exclusively like greater when it comes to the female body and to women's sexuality or queer people's sexuality. So there's a lot of like we've got a lot to wade through when it comes to knowing who we are, what we want, what's authentic for us, because that conditioning is thick and it's heavy.
Yes, totally. And thank you for clarifying that not all people in a certain culture are going to be the same. But it's interesting that the indigenous approach to bodies is very different from our approach to bodies. And I think it's just so important to unpack it, no matter where you come from, to figure out how to have a better relationship to your body, to your sexuality, because it is a life force. Let's pivot to the topic of today, which is people pleasing. And it shows up so much in our intimate relationships, including when we date and we're trying to make a good impression, and sometimes show up as somebody that we're not, and even in our long-term relationships. So why is it so problematic?
No, well, this is actually a really clear line between what we were just talking about and people pleasing, because it is fundamentally cultural conditioning, specifically very heavily entrenched in those of us who happen to be born and acculturated as girls and live as women, where what we learn about ourselves implicitly and explicitly is that our value and our safety are rooted in being pleasing to others, our parents, to people in positions of power, to our teachers, to our community members, our sports coaches, or what have you. There's a defaulting to, if you don't rock the boat, if you're pleasant, if you kind of just be who you think other people need you to be, then that is the most direct route to a life well lived. And that has some real limitations. um, that now, what's true is that people pleasing is fundamentally a protective strategy, right? It's a survival tactic. Even if it's not something that we would have chosen consciously, our young selves were like, oh, okay, this is what I got to do. Like, this is how I fall in line. This is how I get loved. This is how people give me the smiles and the warmth and the pats on the back. And so we grow up with this getting further and further ingrained into our sense of ourselves and how we move in the world. And so it's no wonder that when it comes to our adult experiences of dating and relating, people pleasing is going to be just as prevalent there, if not more so, when what is at stake. And I'm using that term, in a like dramatic way, but like what's at stake is I want this person to love me. Like especially if you're coming from a place of any degree of lack, scarcity, desperation, like really believing that in order to be complete, you need another person in your life, which is different than saying, I would like to be partnered. We know like some people's approach to dating is like really born out of like a very survivalist energy. And that means that you're going to go into those contexts of forming a new connection with someone and getting to know them far more interested in do they like me than really having a barometer to measure do I like them and do I like me in relationship to them. And that's a great way to understand maybe how people pleasing, like can be problematic because we are off center with ourselves. We are out of integrity with ourselves when we're playing the part of who we think another person needs or wants us to be, instead of really like assessing, do I feel good here? Am I relaxed in this person's presence? Are they bringing out the quote unquote best in me? Do I feel inspired by the conversations that we're having? Does it seem like there are enough overlaps and compatibility in our values and our lifestyles and the things that would be meaningful, not just are they the aesthetic that I want? Am I the aesthetic that they want? Like people pleasing keeps us at the surface of things as opposed to really embodying the depth. And it has us present a very false version of ourselves, as opposed to really being authentic and genuine. And if anyone who's listening to this, it's like if what you want is a relationship that will have longevity, then your true self needs to be included in that. There's no way to really satisfyingly go the distance, whatever that distance may be. So yeah, I feel like there's a lot that I said there, and there's so much more I can't say. I'll just give it a pause.
Well, it's all so important. I think that what you said about childhood, about it's an adaptive survival skill. And when I took the positive intelligence course, we talked about saboteurs, and it is one of the saboteurs that they list, the ways that we end up sabotaging ourselves, people pleasing, being hypervigilant, being controlling. These are all things I had never really considered as a so-called saboteur, but they do sabotage us because they have us showing up as an extreme version of who we are. That was an adaptive version to survive in childhood, to be able to survive in our family, to be liked, to be included. And the problem is, when we're carrying it into adulthood, we're no longer ourselves. We're operating still from an old operating system. And
Totally.
so, yeah, and there's very little awareness because being kind to people is good. Being people pleasing is different than being kind.
Right. And that's the thing, people pleasing masquerades as a lot of things that in an objective sense are valuable and positive. Like to your point, like to be kind. Like what's wrong with that? Well, what's wrong with it is if you don't genuinely feel kindness, you're basically drawing from a dry well. And so that means it's coming at a cost. It's not flowing from a place of sustainability or generosity. There's going to be a cost, whether that cost is immediate or down the line. There's going to be a price to pay for false kindness or a kindness, like a kindness that's a put on as opposed to something that's authentically arising and emerging. You mentioned control, hypervigilance. These things are literal killers, by which I mean the amount of stress that it creates physiologically in our bodies. And then what ends up happening, a lot of the people who I work with, so, because my work is a very hands-on, hands-in, embodied journey around sexuality and intimacy. Some of my clients have very extensive trauma histories where there's some really egregious things that have happened. Many of my clients, however, have we can call it the little t trauma of faking just about every aspect of their intimate lives for a very long time, having sex that they do not want to be having because they've never figured out what they do want, so there's a sense of like, this isn't it. Ah, God, okay, I'm just going to go along and do it because I don't want to rock the boat, or it's easier to just go get it over with, like all these narratives that when they're not being really examined and interrogated in a loving way, when we're not doing the work to like get curious about what's underneath that, we end up simply withdrawing, right? And then there's a distancing and a disconnecting not only from a partner but from ourselves. We're not connected to ourselves as an erotic being, as a sexual being, as someone who wants to share intimacy with another, because it's been this whole performance that's never really satisfied us and never really been for us to begin with. And I have the immense pleasure of getting to spend my days helping primarily women like create new experiences for themselves where they get to learn, this is what I like and this is what I don't, and this is what it is to actually lovingly hold a boundary. This is what it's like to feel confident in my voice, to express my desires, to be relaxed enough that I can allow another person's attention and affection in, as opposed to the vigilance and the control, which we're doing. Again, it's protective, it's adaptive, but it's blocking us. It's blocking us from genuine intimacy. It's blocking us from being seen and known for who we truly are and being loved for who we truly are. And in the dating realm, like backing this up to just getting to know somebody, if this is where you're beginning a connection, like, and yeah, all of us, I think, have to a degree, some degree or another. I'll say, I won't say all. I'll say most of us are going to be motivated if we're going on a first date. Like, sure, we want to put our best foot forward. Like, it's not like we're going to come in and be like, let me tell you all the ways that I'm cray. Like, like some people do. Some people are like, I want to talk to
Some
you about
do.
my trauma. I want to tell you about like my laundry list of deal breakers. I think most of us, though, when we're really in earnest, like trying to forge a connection, it's natural to want to highlight and emphasize the best parts of yourself. But there's a difference between that and shaping yourself, contorting yourself into who you think somebody else that you don't even know. You don't know them. So you don't actually know anything about what they really, really like or want. They've chosen to go on a date with you. Like, why not try being yourself would be, the obvious thing, I think. Doesn't mean it's easy. Because the people pleasing can run real, real deep, but this is why we have conversations like the one you and I are having to plant that seed, that get that little earworm going. That's like, huh, maybe I have been approaching this in a way that's not actually serving me. Maybe there is a pattern playing out here that's effectively been invisible to me because it's so normalized. People pleasing, we see it all over the place. And as I said, and you said, it can masquerade as things that are objectively positive taken out of context. But we get to look at what is the context of our people pleasing, and perfectionism colludes with people pleasing. You mentioned the
Mhm.
hypervigilance, the controlling, that colludes with it. It tends toward creating a lot of anxiousness and activation of one's nervous system. So it's contributing to stress and an inability to really relax and receive. So we have every motivation if what we really, really want is to contribute to the co-creation of a satisfying relationship with another person. Really, we have every motivation to figure out how can I be my real self? How do I drop those strategies and let the masks fall away and learn to be me, which usually means the first step is I have to learn who I am and what I like and what I want for myself.
Which is something that most of us never ask ourselves, unfortunately, or we ask ourselves way later in life, like I did at 50, I think was the first time
Yeah.
I was in coaching school. And it's like, oh, we're doing values and we're trying to figure out what do you stand for and what's important to you? I don't know. Like, whoever spent time doing any of those things.
Yeah.
But just to back up on some of the things that you've shared, I have clients who are so distanced from themselves that they spend the date not even in their body, really. They're so outside of themselves. They can leave the date feeling like I didn't really feel a connection, but I still want them to like me. And so these are issues. And I love the sort of the questions that you started to ask yourself. That this is something I do with my clients to debrief a date is to ask, how did your body feel during the date? Did I feel bored? Did I feel captivated? Did I feel curious to know more about them? We spend so much time just going, did they have a good job? Do they make enough money? Do they own their house? Were they good looking? Are they taller than I am? These are all things that matter much less than who am I in relation to them? And one of the questions I ask is, what side of you did that person bring out? We often don't even know what that is. So I would love to hear any other tips you have at beginning to unwind the patterns of people pleasing so that especially people who are dating can begin with more authenticity, more self inquiry, things like that.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the work that I do guide my clients in, which, it starts with some of the fundamentals are many of us have no idea what it actually feels like to have a sense of safety in our own bodies. So when we talk about being dissociated, disembodied, like that experience of like my head knew what was going on, but there was really no sense of feeling and sensation in my physical realm, like that's where the work has to begin, because our bodies are incredibly wise, just so deeply wise, just like any other animal. So let's stay with me while I remind everybody listening that we are animals fundamentally. We are mammals. We have instincts. We have these threat responses. That is what people pleasing is, a version of fawning, which we talk now about fight, flight, freeze. Fawn has become far more included in the mainstream of ways that humans respond to threat, ways that animals can respond to threat. And so when we are really connected to our animal body, to those deep instincts, we will feel yes and no as a sensation. We will sense in our body, I should go in this direction. I should go in the other direction. This is not rocket science, and it's not complicated. As babies, we were playing with these dynamics all the time. We learn what to touch and what not to touch, what can go in our mouth, what shouldn't go in our mouth, because we're far more connected to these very primal instincts that live in us. And so fast forward to us in our 40s and our 50s and our 60s, which is most of the people who I support are women in that age range as well. A lot of like perimenopause, menopausal, postmenopausal, which can be a real season of renewal for women, even though we get a lot of cultural, just rigmarole of how horrible that phase of life can be and all the challenges and the symptoms. It also is a time of just not caring as much in a good way about the things that used to seem so important, and really aligning with a sense of our authentic selves and our values. And when we can use that as a time to cultivate a greater connection with our bodies and really learn how to listen for that wisdom, sense into that wisdom. If I go on a date with someone and I notice the entire time that my arms are like over my belly, that my chest feels tight, that I've got the fake smile on my face, or things like that, like I will track, oh, my body was not at ease with this person. I was performing in such a way that my true self, my relaxed, available self wasn't coming forward. My expressive, emotive self didn't emerge. Like those are the kinds of things that in a dating context you might begin to track. And it's just a few examples, of which there are so very many. But you ask, like, how does somebody get started? And it's a journey of learning to form an intimate connection with your own self and your body. And this is not snap your fingers quickly done type of work. I would also suggest, and I may be biased, but doesn't mean I'm wrong, that having a guide, having a coach, having someone who does the kind of work that I do or that you do, Sandy, like there are people who can support us in compassionate inquiry, in somatic practice. And in case somatic is a word that people don't know, that simply means body-based practices, things that are helping us to feel a sense of being at home and at ease in the flesh and bone meat suit that we inhabit, which again, talking about things that are in our cultural conditioning, our dominant culture is one of disembodiment. We are actively taught to distance ourselves and distrust our bodies. And this is similar and different from just like body shaming, body negativity, the things that we spoke of earlier on. It's that everything about our kind of mainstream way of growing up, being acculturated, and living lives is a from the neck up. We are far more pliable to the powers that be when we're not sensing and feeling our bodies saying, yeah, this is not right for me, or I don't feel safe here. I'm not open to this person. I don't like this policy, and or what have you. Like when we really have that connection to our bodies, we stir up good trouble. I define it as good trouble, which is to say that we push back against certain norms and standards that may have very little to do with our own sense of right, wrong, good, bad, desirable, undesirable. We start to question, why are these things normalized? Does this work for me? Who would I be if I didn't believe this, if I didn't ascribe to this? And this is why I say with my work that I do that even though it centers around sex and intimacy, it really is about a whole life and whole person transformation. Because the fundamentals that we're speaking of here, when you become more connected to your body and your body's wisdom, when you are able to discern boundaries and preferences with clarity, and you stand for, this is me, this is who I am, this is my truth, whether we're talking about a first date, whether we're talking about political action, whether we're talking about dinner with the family, like wherever this might show up, like everything starts to change when we know who we really are and feel at home in ourselves. So it truly is about a holistic transformation that's available when you begin to orient from that place.
I'm just nodding my head the whole time because I mean the work I do as well is very holistic. Somebody comes in for a dating coaching and they end up with a better job and a better apartment and they move and they everything starts to align because they're doing that deeper work. And that disembodiment is so common. And I remember there's a woman that I know who used to always be smiling no matter how she felt. And this is how it often shows up, that fawning, you're angry and you're smiling. Like it was so disconcerting. And I could even hear it on the phone when I would talk to her. I could hear her smile.
Yeah.
And I suggested that she go to a somatic healer. She ended up really transforming and finding her second husband in a much easier way. Her first husband was extremely narcissistic, really preyed on her fawning. And her second husband was respectful of who she was. He talks things out with her. She's learned to speak up, even though it takes her a while to process because she's afraid of her first response still. But I remember her sharing some of the exercises with me and even just crouching down into a ball to feel, aloneness, really feeling it in your body in a really big way has helped her to express herself sexually and verbally and in every single part of her life.
None of this is rocket science. None of this is complicated. That's not the same as saying that it's easy, but
Yes.
like people spend good money and invest good amounts of time to come and learn with me and be guided by me. And I say it to them as I'm saying it to you. Like if you're expecting something really fancy schmancy here, I'm sorry, but I'm going to disappoint you. By which I mean, like, I'll bring this back to what I said at the beginning about erotic wholeness. It is fundamentally about how do I be human? So we exist in these bodies. We are human animals. The impulses, the instincts, they're here. The wisdom is here. The clarity is here. So why not? Or better to say, like, what would we have to gain by being our true self in relation to someone? I get that that can feel terrifying, especially if you have lived your life with a lot of these adaptive and protective strategies at the forefront. I want to just posit that it is possible that the person you're sitting across the table from on the first date might really want to know the true you. And that when we give other people the opportunity to show up for the real us, we're giving a gift. People tend to really want authenticity, like the right ones, the real ones.
Yeah.
And saying right and real is subjective because what's right and real for me is not necessarily what's right and real for you, right? And so
Correct.
there's a lot of room for individuality and difference here, but thematically, you're not allowing someone the chance to show you that they are curious about the real you, that they want to be in relationship with that person if you are masquerading as the people pleasing version of yourself.
Mhm.
When we take the masks off and we actually create experiences of shared vulnerability with another person, that's where intimacy really grows from. There's no way to have a truly intimate connection without vulnerability. So again, it's not to say that this is easy to do, but it's also not especially complicated. Like to learn how to be vulnerable is to say, like, I don't really feel safe all the time, or I'm afraid that if I don't laugh at every joke, you're going to think I'm not interested in you, or whatever your thing is that you might want to share and disclose that then invites the other person to lean in with their vulnerability. It invites them to appreciate you for being who you are, for giving some permission for them to be more of who they are. It's always a reciprocal thing. When back when I used to facilitate more like groups, one of my favorite ways to open a group, often my groups were groups of women, and like we'd sit in a circle and I would invite people to say, what is the thing? I mean, and this is like first pass, like we haven't even done names or anything yet. It's like, what is something that you really would want people in the room to know and are afraid to tell them? And we would go around and everybody would speak something vulnerable. And by the time that round was done, there was so much head nodding and hand on the chesting and like, oh my God, I'm not the only one. And oh, my sister speaks for me. Because when we are being authentic and vulnerable, we are also relatable.
Mhm.
So if I'm trying to tie all the things together. So if what we're talking about is going on a date because you want to be in a relationship, you need to be relatable. You need to learn
Yes.
how to be relatable. And that's going to require taking those masks off and cultivating the resource within yourself. This is where the somatic work comes in a really big way. Nervous system resource and capacity, which means I can feel my that's edgy for me and do it anyway. I can
Mhm.
do something that's a little risky, perhaps, that might ping against some of those adaptive strategies and make their little spidey sense go up. But fundamentally, I know I am resourced, I am safe, I have the capacity to take a calculated quote unquote risk, and then I'll be okay whatever happens here. Many of us don't know that experientially yet, right? Like we haven't always tested these things out, or maybe we've done some tests and they haven't gone well in the past because of who we were in relationship with, or maybe we weren't as resourced as we thought we were. So this brings it back to why it's so valuable to have guidance, to be supported in cultivating more capacity, growing your skills, really then, positioning yourself to feel a sense of confidence and empowerment that might be new for you to show up as your real, true, authentic self. I mean, that's who
Yeah.
I would want to be sitting across the table from if I'm choosing to date with someone. So
Yeah, me too. Let's take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Amazon Music Unlimited. You can listen to over 70 million songs and thousands of playlists and stations. Plus, you can now stream your favorite podcasts like Last First Date Radio. You can listen to any song, anytime, anywhere, on any of your devices. Get Amazon Music Unlimited for free for 30 days. Just head on over to getamazonmusic.com/last first date to learn more and claim this offer. There are people who are in relationship, and this has happened to clients of mine, where they bring up sexual issues, where they're trying to have these conversations, and the person dismisses them, belittles them, says, this is just the way I am. And because they're so used to fawning, they don't feel like they have a right to their voice. And so working together, helping them to craft these conversations, but also craft them with the right people, because you have to have the right people to share them with. But if somebody's listening and wants to bring this into a conversation with somebody that they're in relationship with, what do you suggest?
okay, so the first rule of Fight Club, not Fight Club. The first rule of talking about sex and intimacy is to not do it during sex. Seriously, I cannot emphasize this enough that you are always going to have a better conversation when you do it in a moment of neutrality. And we want to check for the basic human things, you can use the HALT acronym. Make sure nobody is hungry, make sure nobody is angry, tired. Like we do we like we want to make sure our basic human needs are attended to so that when we show up in said moment of neutrality, we're also showing up resourced. The other thing we want is consent. And I'm going to do a version of consent here that could simply be buy-in. Don't just spring this on your partner at the end of the workday when they've just walked in the house and are trying to settle in. Say, in a moment when everyone's like relatively calm, hey, I would love to get together and have a chat about what's going on in our sex life and our intimacy. And it's important to me to feel like we're both available to that. Are you up for that too? Like you want their buy-in, don't just spring it on them. Now, that right there is going to give you also a really great litmus test because if you're in partnership with someone who stonewalls you or gaslights you in that moment, that's a red flag. But if you're with a partner who says, yeah, I'm up for that, or okay, this makes me nervous, but I'm willing, like, then you at least know that you're with someone who, like you, is willing to risk some vulnerability or some discomfort to show up for what really matters. So how you set it up makes a big difference. The other place where a lot of us tend to go off the rails is we come in with all sorts of complaints and not a whole lot of clarity about what we actually need and want. And so we're not giving the other person much to respond to then because they're going to go on to the defensive or shut down in the face of complaints. Whereas it's very, very different if we say, for instance, let's, I'm looking for a real example here. Bear with me while my brain catches up. Like an example of, let's say you don't love the pace that your partner touches you. Like maybe they're like a little too quick, a little too grabby. And what you really want is to feel something slower, maybe a little softer. You want them attuning to your body. So the way to give that feedback instead of just complaining, like, I don't like the way you touch me, or it feels like you're grabbing at me and that's not working for me. What we could say is, I really know that both of us want to have a thriving physical connection. I would love to be close to you and feel you close to me. And something that I've been noticing lately is our paces seem a little off. I'm wanting a bit more slowness, and it seems like you're moving a bit quickly. Like, can we talk about how we might find a middle ground? Can I show you? Sometimes demonstrating through like touch or a physical enactment is a great way to then give a person guidance about what we're wanting. So we need to be in a position to coach our I was about to say clients. They're not your client. Coach your, that's what I do. That's what you do. But we will often need to coach our partners a bit about what we need simply because none of us knows what it's like to be in another person's body. What feels good to me and what feels good to you could vary widely. Oftentimes, the way we touch another person is the way that we like to be touched. It's like the default mode, but that doesn't mean that it's what works for them. So, this was an example of which there are a bajillion different ways that you might want to talk. But the things I want to emphasize is, again, like getting their buy-in to have a conversation, doing it in a moment when you're resourced, coming in not just with complaint, but with something constructive where you can say, here's what I'm hoping we can do together. And the other piece that was implicit in this, but I want to pull it out and highlight it is when we center in our intention of, I want connection with you and I know you want connection with me too. When we center in something that is complementary and connected, it's a lot easier to then give some constructive feedback. I like to
Yeah.
do, I call it a feedback sandwich. Say something positive, give the constructive piece of feedback, another something positive on the other side. Makes it go down a whole lot easier than just like the nagging, complaining energy or the silence. And, because this conversation was rooted in people pleasing, I get that what I'm proposing here would be quite a leap for a lot of people pleasers, and that we're used to just like, okay, I'm just going to go along with this. Like, even if I hate it, even if I feel like I'm enduring something, which I want you to know that if you are enduring, if you are tolerating, you are not actually having consensual intimacy. You can't. There's no way for it to be fully consensual if one person is gritting their teeth and going along. Even if that person said yes, you are operating outside of the true definition of a consensual dynamic. And I think many of us would, if we're hearing this, we would say, well, we want our sex to be consensual. Like I'm not a sociopath here. So you got to look at where you hiding out in that people pleasing is actually undermining both you and whoever you're sharing yourself with, new partner, long-term partner, really showing up in a truly consensual and equitable way, because you're not representing yourself authentically there. And it compounds on itself, the way that can really create a lot of problems and undermine the health and the integrity of a relationship.
Yeah, that's such an important point that you just made. And I think so many people will be like, wait, what? But I
I
think
want to point
that's,
you to the wheel of consent. Like if you're hearing me talk about consent and you're confused or like, oh, I want to know more, the wheel of consent is a body of work by a wonderful woman named Dr. Betty Martin. She's got a ton of free resources out on the interwebs and such. And you can learn more about what I mean when I say that if you're tolerating or you're enduring, you're not truly in a consensual dynamic if you dive into Betty's work, or that could be a whole other conversation. Yeah,
that's a fascinating conversation because I think what happened after Me Too is that consent got very misunderstood, in my
very,
opinion. And
very.
I think that a lot of, in my experience, because I'm dating, I would see men who would be afraid to ask, afraid to do anything. They would lose their masculinity basically. And, is it okay for me to touch you? Is it okay for me to sit next to you? Is it okay? Do you want me to plan the date? Do you want to plan the date? And it's just like, what are you doing here?
Yeah, it's like it's an abundance of caution, aka nice guy syndrome. And
Yes.
it's not malicious, but it is a real downer and like wet blanket energy when many of us, what we're seeking in an intimate connection is some degree of polarity. We want to feel like the taking being taken, the somebody's leading and following, someone's inviting and accepting. These are dynamics that the wheel of consent really gets into in a more nuanced way. And it is like I said, we could have a whole other conversation about this. The point that I simply want to impress is that consent is more, I don't have a better word than to repeat, nuanced. It's not just a question of yes, no, do I, don't I, do you, don't you. Like we have to understand what it really takes for two people to create a fully consensual exchange with each other. And Betty has really geeked out on this to the most fantastic degree. She's got a book, she's got YouTube videos. Like, please go check her out.
All right, I will definitely put that link in the show notes. I just, as you were talking, I realized that overly cautious way of asking for consent is another form of people pleasing,
It
and
is.
which
It is.
is extremely
Well
off-putting.
spotted. Well
Yeah.
spotted. Yeah, because it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to be real cautious over here to make sure I don't do something that might offend you or might think wrong. But again, and that might even be a more like a meatier, juicier example for people to sink into. Because particularly if you're a woman listening to that anecdotally, and you're a heterosexual woman who's dating men, and what you want is that more the polarity that we are taught like about, which is like the man in power and leadership in a healthy, integrated way, and the woman feeling like, oh, like I'm going to be like taken on a ride here, taken on an experience here. Now, I want to be clear in saying that those norms have real shadow sides to them as well. Like we want to investigate everything. But if that is your hoped for experience as a woman in a heterosexual context, and if as a man you actually want to feel empowered and confident and like you're taking leadership in a good way and not having to like check in for everything, then it behooves you to see where, yes, there's some major people pleasing going on here, and you haven't bothered to get to know what really works for each other, what each of you really wants, what your capacities are, because you're so busy with these masks on, with this performance of being pleasing to another, as opposed to the vulnerability and the intimacy of being real. So I would say, go educate yourself about the wheel of consent and be real. That is my sage advice.
And take off that
Understand,
mask and be real.
understanding this is a process. This is a deep,
Yes.
deep healing process. It's very fun for me to sit here and talk about it with levity, and we are actually speaking about some very deep work. Yet it is the most meaningful work that I know of because fundamentally we want to be known for who we are, loved for who we are, chosen for who we truly are. And we
Hmm.
need to be able to take those masks off and give people a chance to do that. Otherwise, it's never going to be possible.
Yeah. And it's terrifying to take your mask off if you don't start the process of actually defining who you are, because you're just like standing on a tightrope without a net. It's like all my life I've operated one way. And I would say, like, even my divorce was a lot of that for me. My son just said to me the other day, you enjoy being a storyteller. You enjoy being on stage. And I'm like, no, I never liked being on stage. He goes, but you do. And it took me aback because I've been doing storytelling since my divorce. I had a TED talk, I did all these things, but I was never on stage in front of a camera, microphone. None of these things were how I would have defined myself, because it's not about putting a spotlight on me and me being the important person. When I could redefine it as, I want to share my story so that, just like you said, somebody else can feel their story. Somebody else can feel the impact of somebody sharing something that they have felt and maybe couldn't share it. That to me is the work. It's not, look at me, aren't I great? And so I think that a lot of times we think we're something and we realize that we've been hiding behind those masks and hiding our power, hiding our talent, hiding many of the parts of us that come out and explode when we start to really uncover who we really are.
We contain multitudes, you know.
Yes, we do.
So
Yes, we
it's
do.
letting the gifts of those multitudes be known and be received by others. That's the foundation of relationship.
Mhm. So, I would love to hear just one short example of somebody that you've helped to transform in this way.
I'll share about one of just my most beloved clients, Esther, who I worked with over an arc that had multiple chapters. And when we first met, Esther was in a long-term marriage, three children, really trying hard to enjoy sex with her husband and recognizing that there were a lot of differences and challenges. And now I'm choosing to tell a story that many people are going to hear what comes next and be like, what? I don't want that for myself, but stay with me. We can fast forward to Esther recognizing through the work that we did together that she was queer and that she needed a totally different quality of sex life than what she was having. And they began to explore together as a couple how to reshape things to make sense, like space for who it was that she was becoming and what she needed to feel sexually fulfilled. And they did that together for a while until they actually realized that they didn't want to stay together anymore. And she wanted to go on and claim this part of herself and live as her most authentic self, which is no longer her. She is a they now, and is thriving in her relationship. We just actually exchanged an email about 2, 3 weeks ago. Like, has fallen in love, is like deeply enamored in this beautiful new relationship where they really feel like they are their authentic selves. Kids are thriving. It's just been this beautiful journey of going from the ultimate performance, the ultimate people pleasing. She had been raised with a lot of religious conservatism, had gotten married very young. All she really ever knew was that relationship. And then fast forward to such a radical overhauling of who she believed herself to be and what authenticity and truth and real intimacy were like, to claim pleasure beyond anything she's known, love that feels really deep and satisfying and sustainable, to feel like a better parent now and more available to relationship with children, like with their children. So that's not everybody's path. Not everyone who comes to work with me or who's listening to this is like go because they're going to change their gender or sexual orientation or things of that nature. But what happens consistently for my clients is they get to know something in just intrinsic about themselves. They get to know this is what feels good in my body. This is how I like to be loved, how I want to be touched, how I want to express myself, how I want my relationships to go. And then they can either grow into that with existing partners, or they are positioned to call in people who will meet them in that place. It's not a rare thing. That's maybe
Yeah.
the thing folks to know. Like if you're available to the work, you're available to the transformation. It's here for you. It's a choice.
Yeah.
So you choose that.
It's a beautiful story of transformation, because so many listeners and who are in relationships or have been in relationships where they haven't felt a sense of passion, fulfillment, sense of obligation is usually what dominates.
There was
And
a lot of that going on.
yeah, I mean, I did a lot of that. I did a lot of let's keep the peace, and it sucks your soul. It really sucks your soul if you're a conscious person and you know that there's something better and you to be better. I mean, I always tell people I can't guarantee you're going to find love. I can guarantee you're going to love yourself more by the end of this.
Well, I mean,
And
that's a form of finding love, I would argue.
that's true. It's a big form of finding
And
love.
it
And to
is.
me,
That's
everything
the
stems from there, everything. And
I
so,
agree. And that's like a delicate one. Like sometimes people are like beating the self-love drum so heavily. It's like, wait, but I actually want to be loved by other people. Of course. Of course you do. Because we're made for that. We're wired for relationship. It's not an either or. It's not even a first and then. It's a both and. So
mhm,
the more we fall in love with our real true selves and get to know our real true selves, the more we can have love with others.
yeah, authentically and
Yeah.
in a real connection, because whatever part of us is connecting before we do that work is going to attract the people who are loving that part of us, which isn't the full breadth of who we are. Now, sometimes people do grow together and discover those parts of
Totally.
themselves, which is a beautiful thing. But often that's not the case. Often one partner will start to do the self work, and the other partner is like, this is who I am. I have
Yep.
zero growth mindset and I'm just fixed in who I am. And
That was
yeah,
me and my marriage,
hmm,
my
yeah.
my ex-husband and I, like that was 100% it. And by his own acknowledgement, like we actually had a beautiful conversation about 3 years after our divorce, where we finally sat down for this like heart to heart. The anger had subsided. And I was like, yeah, this was him to me. You're on this spiritual journey, you're on this growth path. It's not my path. And I knew that it wasn't my path. And I knew that you wouldn't be satisfied in partnership with someone who wasn't growing with you. Like it was really that simple. Nothing about it felt easy at the time, but it was that simple. So
Yeah.
you're
And
something that I know intimately.
yes, well, thank you for sharing that. It's the grace of knowing who you are and the fact that you're not aligned and that both of you are better off finding
Yeah.
other partners or being by yourself. All right. So, what are your final words of advice for anyone who wants to go on their last first date?
I want you to know that it's not everything we've talked about today is it's not a personal failing. If you are like, oh, damn, I'm people pleasing left, right, and center. Like if you're hearing yourself in what we've talked about today and recognizing that these adaptive strategies have been online, and maybe that's part of the reason why you haven't found your last first date yet, right? Like what I want you to know is that it's not a personal failing and that it's a choice you get to make to unwind this. Like the possibility and the potential are here. It's real. And so the advice I want to give you is to access whatever courage you can muster, whatever love for yourself you can muster to say, okay, let me get to know who I really am. Like I deserve that because you do. And then where your path takes you from there to Sandy, to me, to someone else who might guide you, like remains to be seen, but only you can make that choice for yourself. So I really hope you will.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think that a lot of people could take this whole conversation and think I'm a failure and I'm a people pleaser, but that's not what we're saying here at all. It is a choice that we didn't get to choose our parents, our upbringing, but we do get to choose our future, our present. And there's no time like today to make those choices and change the whole trajectory of your life. I mean, it is incredibly empowering to know that you have those choices. Darshana, tell us where people can find you.
Your best place to find me is my website, which is my name, darshanaavila.com. And I have a newsletter that goes out. I have a YouTube channel as well. I have an Insta. I'm on it back on Instagram, even though they took my old account down. So you can find me on those usual places. And I love hearing from folks, especially when it's like, oh, I heard this podcast interview, that podcast interview. So reach out. And if you're curious about working with me, I have clients who come to work with me from all over the US, from different countries. So location isn't a barrier if travel is an option for you. If you don't happen to be local to me, I'm in Oakland, California. So if you're curious about it, then reach my way and let's explore what's possible.
Beautiful. And I think you said that you have a free gift, Galgasm, the
Yeah,
online
I
community
do.
hub.
I have an online community hub that is full of a ton of resources, practices to support you with embodiment that we talked about here, practices for self-intimacy. I do video calls sometimes inside of the community. So yeah, Galgasm is a wonderful place to kind of get your bearings and get more of a feel for what I do and what I'm about. So please feel free to join us there.
And how can people find that?
It is on the School platform, which is SKOOL. So it's school.com/galgasm, GALGASM.
That will all be in the show notes. Thank you so much, Darshana, for coming on the show. This has just been such a rich conversation, hopefully transformative to many of our listeners. So thank you again.
So welcome. Thanks for having me, Sandy.
You're welcome. And thanks everybody for listening today. If you love our show, please give us a high rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And as always, here's to your last first date. If you are ready to get unstuck, gain new tools, become more empowered, and finally find your last first date, I'd love to talk to you. Fill out an application to be considered for a complimentary half-hour love breakthrough session at lastfirstdate.com/application.